2016 is not going to plan for global markets, and two big things are getting the blame. One of them is oil, and the other one is China. It's been a year of big numbers so far, 7% off Chinese stocks here, 7% there, circuit breakers, you name it. Martin Wolf is joining me to talk about whether this matters as much as we all think. I suspect he's going to say yes. Martin, are we worrying about this the correct amount or potentially even not enough?
I think we almost certainly worrying about the immediate market turmoil too much. I don't think what's happened to the currencies all that significant in and of itself. It's still very high. It's risen enormously in recent years. Its depreciation on a real effective basis is really very, very modest. That's not significant. And I don't think we should worry about the stock market. The Chinese stock market is almost completely detached from the Chinese economy. It's very bubbly. It has been in the past. And what we're seeing is a huge and really, I think, very foolish bubble deflate, sort of reach its peak in the middle of last year. So I don't think we should worry about the markets, but I do think we should worry about what's going on in the Chinese economy, of which this is to some extent a symptom. Essentially, the old model is disappearing. Above all, the investment-driven model is disappearing. The excess savings problem of China is getting worse. And I think we're pretty clearly now seeing capital flight from China. And that's emerging in these very rapid reduction in the currency reserves. They've lost almost 20% of their reserves relatively quickly, a little over a year. And that indicates that actually making the economy work well and getting through the transition, the adjustment, is very hard.
Now, where are we in that transition? There's this horrible sense that these awful days of volatility and global markets, rightly or wrongly, do very much take their cue from what happens in China overnight. Is this something that we're going to have to put up with for a year, 18 months, 5 years?
Well, it depends what one means by the transition. Everybody has a different idea, but what I think of as a transition hasn't started. What is the transition? This is an economy which has structural macroeconomic imbalances of extraordinary scale. It's investing about, nobody knows precisely, something like 45% of GDP. It's saving close to 50% of GDP. It has a rapidly rising debt to support this investment, which are now, by emerging market standards, very high. And the savings rate is not falling. The investment rate isn't falling very much. The share of households in disposable income, which is the only way really to raise consumption, is to raise that, has hardly risen. As far as we can see, barely risen. The debt levels are continuing to rise. So the underlying...
But apart from that...
the underlying imbalances, they're not getting worse. Yep. In fact, there's a sign that the imbalances have topped out. They're beginning to adjust. But the process of adjustment to what I would think of as a more normal and sustainable structure of the economy has really barely begun. And of course, it's generating a lot of turmoil. And part of that is people are beginning to realize that the growth really is much lower. I think there's probably some capital flight because of political fears. The anti-corruption campaign, people trying to get their money out. But there's also, I suspect, a sense that investment opportunities aren't what they used to be. We want to get our money out. And I think that what the economy is trying to do is to bring the currency down a long way. But the authorities, for very good reasons, don't want that to happen. So there's a real fight here between economic forces and the ability of the authorities to manage them. I've seen this often before. We used to think 30 years ago the Japanese had everything in control. It turned out they didn't. The economy is more powerful than any government when it really, really starts forcing correction.
What's your assessment of the policy responses that we've seen so far and the efforts by the authorities to cool this down? Are they making matters worse in the short term at least?
I think that what they've shown is you can't really manage the symptoms successfully of this sort of adjustment when people don't have complete confidence in their ability to go through the whole long process. And the answer to your earlier question is the process of adjustment for China, is clearly multi-year. It's clearly something that will take 5 years, maybe 10 years. I mean, it's a long-term process of adjustment.
Well, we're just going to have to buckle up for the long haul then. Martin, thanks very much.
Pleasure.